I stared at my sister's smiling face on her wedding day, a knot forming in my stomach as she posed with the man who should have been mine. David's gentle eyes caught mine across the crowded reception hall, a flicker of regret passing between us before my sister, Olivia, pulled his attention back to her. "Isn't my husband handsome?" she gushed to the photographer, emphasizing the word husband, while throwing a triumphant glance my way. I forced a smile, the weight of my own engagement ring, to a man I secretly feared, suddenly heavy on my finger. If only I could go back 5 years and change everything. But this wasn't my first life. This was my second chance, and somehow, I had ended up in an even worse situation than before. My name is Eleanor Matthews, and in my previous life, I died at 32 in an accident that was no accident at all. I was pushed down a flight of stairs by my husband, Marcus Reed, a man whose charming public persona masked a monster. For years, I'd endured his escalating abuse, too ashamed and afraid to leave, until that final confrontation when he decided I was more valuable to him dead than alive. As my consciousness faded in that other life, my final thought was regret. Regret for all the warning signs I'd ignored, for the life I'd never live. Then, inexplicably, I was given a second chance. I woke up 10 years in the past at 22, with all my memories intact. A chance to rewrite my story and avoid the tragic end that awaited me. The first person I sought out was David Clark, the kind, soft-spoken man I'd briefly dated before meeting Marcus. In my previous life, our relationship had ended when I moved away for a job opportunity. By the time I returned to our hometown 2 years later, he was engaged to someone else. That someone else had left him at the altar, and our paths never meaningfully crossed again until years later, when it was too late. This time would be different. With my foreknowledge, I orchestrated a chance meeting with David at the local coffee shop where he worked on his novel every Thursday. Our connection was immediate and electric, just as I remembered. Within months we were inseparable, our relationship deepening with the kind of honest, healthy love I'd been denied in my previous life. But I hadn't accounted for one variable: my younger sister, Olivia. In my first life, Olivia and I had drifted apart after I married Marcus. She'd tried to warn me about him, seeing through his charm to the controlling behavior beneath, and I'd shut her out, choosing to believe my husband over my sister. By the time I realized she'd been right, it was too late to repair our relationship. She'd moved across the country, and we communicated only through holiday cards and occasional strained phone calls. In this second chance, I was determined to maintain our close bond. But I didn't realize that my happiness with David had awakened something dark in Olivia. A competitive streak I'd forgotten existed between us as teenagers. She'd always resented being the other Matthews girl, forever in my shadow according to our parents' subtle comparisons. Now, watching me build a life with a man who adored me, that resentment resurfaced with a vengeance. It began innocently enough. Olivia started dropping by unannounced when she knew David would be at my apartment. She'd ask his opinion on everything, laugh too loudly at his jokes, touch his arm when speaking to him. I noticed but dismissed it as Olivia being her typical effervescent self. David seemed oblivious, treating her with the same kind consideration he showed everyone. Then came the night of my promotion celebration. I'd been made partner at the architectural firm where I'd been working since my return. A career path I hadn't taken in my previous life, due to Marcus's insistence that I focus on supporting his business instead. David had organized a small gathering at his place, inviting our closest friends and family. I was in the kitchen getting more wine when I overheard Olivia's voice from the balcony. "Don't you ever wonder what it would be like with someone more spontaneous? Eleanor's so structured, so cautious. Don't you feel constrained sometimes?" My heart stopped as I waited for David's response. "I love your sister exactly as she is," he said firmly. "And this conversation is inappropriate, Olivia." I should have confronted them both then, brought everything into the open. But conflict avoidance was a habit deeply ingrained from my previous life with Marcus, where confrontation inevitably led to punishment. So I pretended I hadn't heard, convinced myself it was a momentary lapse in judgment on Olivia's part. That was my first mistake. Over the next few months, Olivia's campaign intensified. She began calling David directly for help with minor emergencies, A flat tire, a leaky faucet, moving furniture. Always when she knew I was busy with work. Always positioning herself as the damsel in need of rescuing. And David, with his innate desire to help others, couldn't say no. "She's your sister," he'd say whenever I cautiously expressed concern. "She doesn't have anyone else to call." Which was true. Olivia's dating history was a series of brief, disastrous relationships with unavailable men. Men nothing like David. The situation came to a head at our parents' anniversary party. David and I had been dating for nearly 2 years by then, and though we hadn't formally announced it, marriage was a frequent topic in our private conversations. I'd been careful not to push. The future stretched before us with promising possibility, and I was savoring each moment of the healthy relationship I'd been denied in my previous life. That evening, I went looking for David after speaking with some family friends. I found him in my father's study with Olivia, standing too close together, her hand on his chest. They jumped apart when I entered, guilt written across both their faces. "It's not what it looks like," David started, the most cliched line possible. "I was just showing him the scar from my childhood appendectomy," Olivia said quickly. "You know, the one that our cousin's kid was asking about earlier." The explanation was plausible. The scar was just below her ribcage, and Olivia had always been uninhibited about her body. But the tension in the room told a different story. "Eleanor, please." David reached for me as I backed away. Nothing happened. I wanted desperately to believe him. But the memories of Marcus's countless denials and gaslighting flooded back, paralyzing me. Without a word, I fled the room, the house, driving aimlessly until I found myself at a bar on the edge of town. That was where Marcus found me. In my previous life, Marcus and I had met at a charity gala when I was 25. This time around, I'd carefully avoided all the places I knew he would be. But I hadn't accounted for the randomness of life. The way paths cross when least expected. "Rough night?" he asked, sliding onto the stool next to mine. Just as handsome as I remembered, with that charismatic smile that had once made my heart race before it came to signal impending hurt. I should have left immediately. I knew exactly who he was, what he was capable of. But in that moment, raw with betrayal and confusion, I made my second critical mistake. I stayed. I talked. I let him buy me another drink. "Men are all the same," Marcus commiserated, skillfully drawing out the story of what I'd witnessed between David and my sister. "They talk about commitment while keeping their options open. I've always believed in absolute loyalty myself." The irony of this statement would have made me laugh if I hadn't been so emotionally vulnerable. In my previous life, Marcus had been pathologically unfaithful, using his business trips as opportunities for affairs, then punishing me for my paranoid accusations when evidence inevitably surfaced. But this Marcus didn't know that I knew who he truly was. And in my pain and confusion, there was something almost comforting about the familiar, even when the familiar was dangerous. I didn't go home with him that night, but I did accept his phone number. And 3 days later, after David's increasingly desperate calls and texts went unanswered, I agreed to have dinner with Marcus. Just to talk, I told myself. Just to understand why I seemed doomed to be betrayed by those I trusted. If you're finding this story of betrayal and second chances compelling, hit subscribe now to ensure you never miss an episode. What happens next will shock you. Over the following weeks, as I kept David at arm's length, refusing to fully hear his explanations, Marcus became a constant presence. He was different than I remembered, more patient, less controlling. Or perhaps he was simply being more careful in his manipulation, sensing my wariness. "You deserve someone who puts you first," he would say. "Not someone who entertains your sister's advances." David continued his campaign to explain, to reconcile. "There's nothing between me and Olivia," he insisted during one of the brief conversations I allowed. "She was upset about her breakup with that guy from her office. She was crying, and yes, she tried to kiss me, but I stopped her immediately. That's what you walked in on, me pushing her away." I wanted to believe him. Everything I knew about David from both lifetimes told me he was telling the truth. But Olivia's tearful confession said otherwise. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," she sobbed when I finally confronted her. "I didn't mean for anything to happen. We were just talking, and then suddenly, there were feelings." He said he cared about you but wasn't sure you were the one. I should have told you right away. Two people I loved, telling completely different versions of the same story. In my previous life, I'd learned the hard way about Marcus's masterful lies. But I'd never caught David in a lie, in either lifetime. And Olivia. Olivia had always been dramatic, but never deliberately cruel. While I wrestled with whom to believe, Marcus was steadfast in his support. Take all the time you need, he said. I'm not going anywhere. He sent flowers to my office, left thoughtful notes on my car, remembered small details I mentioned in passing. This version of Marcus seemed to be everything the Marcus of my previous life had pretended to be at the beginning. After 2 months of this emotional limbo, David delivered an ultimatum. I can't do this anymore, Eleanor. I love you, but your lack of trust is breaking us. Either you believe me about what happened with Olivia, or we need to end this. That same night, Marcus proposed. I know it soon, he said, kneeling before me with a diamond ring that caught the light with blinding brilliance. But when you know you know. I've never felt this way about anyone before. Let me prove to you that not all men will let you down. I should have run in the opposite direction. Every instinct from my previous life screamed danger. But another, more insidious voice whispered, what if you're wrong? What if this Marcus is different? What if this is why you were given a second chance? Not to be with David, but to heal Marcus. Exhausted by uncertainty and fueled by a lingering sense of betrayal, I made my third and most catastrophic mistake. I said yes to Marcus and definitively ended things with David, ignoring the devastation in his eyes as I returned the small velvet box he'd pulled from his pocket. A box I knew contained his grandmother's emerald ring, the one he'd told me about during late-night conversations about our future. The speed at which everything unraveled after that still gives me nightmares. Olivia, who had been uncharacteristically subdued since our confrontation, suddenly blossomed with renewed confidence. She began mentioning David in casual conversation, how they'd run into each other at the farmer's market, how he'd helped her choose a book for our mother's birthday. We're just friends, she insisted when I questioned her. He needs someone to talk to about losing you. And well, I understand what it's like to want someone you can't have. The implication was clear. She still had feelings for David, and now that I was engaged to Marcus, she saw no reason not to pursue him. The betrayal cut deep, but I was committed to my decision. Marcus was attentive, passionate, seemingly devoted. The red flags I was hypervigilant for remained hidden. And I began to wonder if perhaps this really was a different Marcus than the monster I'd married before. Then came the engagement party. Marcus insisted on something lavish, inviting business associates and social connections I barely knew. This is our future, Eleanor, he said when I suggested something smaller. These relationships will be important for us. It was the first hint of the controlling behavior I remembered, but I rationalized it as normal pre-wedding stress. I was taking a moment alone on the venue's terrace when David appeared beside me. He looked thinner, tired around the eyes, but still handsome in a way that made my heart ache. I need to say this once, and then I'll respect your decision, he said quietly. Olivia admitted everything to me last week. She deliberately tried to come between us, because she's always been jealous of you. Nothing happened between us, Eleanor. Nothing. I've only ever loved you. Before I could respond, he pressed a folded note into my hand. Read this when you're alone. And be careful with Marcus. There are rumors about him that concern me. He left as suddenly as he'd appeared, passing Olivia in the doorway. The look that crossed between them was one of pure ice. Inside the folded paper was a list of names and phone numbers. Women who have restraining orders against Marcus. The heading read in David's neat handwriting. I felt the blood drain from my face. In my previous life, I'd never known about other victims until it was too late. Marcus had been careful to isolate me from anyone who might warn me, moving us to a new city shortly after our wedding. But here was evidence that this Marcus, the one I'd convinced myself was different, had the same violent tendencies as the man who had eventually killed me. I excused myself from the party early, claiming a migraine. Marcus was solicitous in public, escorting me to the car, but once the doors closed, his demeanor changed. What did he say to you? He demanded, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. I saw David corner you on the terrace. Nothing important. I lied, the paper burning in my clutch bag. Just congratulations. Marcus's laugh held no humor. Right. The man you were practically living with for 2 years just wanted to wish you well with your new fiancé. Do I look stupid to you, Eleanor? There it was, the tone I remembered, the one that always preceded violence in my previous life. Fear, familiar and choking, closed my throat. He just wanted closure. I managed. It meant nothing. Marcus seemed to accept this, but the tension remained as he drove us home in silence. Once inside, he poured himself a drink and downed it in one swallow. I think we should move the wedding up, he said. No reason to wait, is there? The question felt loaded, dangerous. Whatever you want, I replied carefully. He smiled, crossing the room to stroke my cheek in a gesture that once might have seemed affectionate, but now made my skin crawl. That's what I love about you, Eleanor. You're so reasonable. So accommodating. That night, lying beside Marcus as he slept, I faced the terrible truth. I had escaped this man once only to willingly walk back into his trap. And this time, I dragged others into the wreckage of my poor choices. The next morning, I called the first number on David's list. The woman, Catherine, was initially reluctant to speak, but when I explained I was engaged to Marcus, her tone changed. Get out now, she said flatly. It starts small, checking your phone, criticizing your friends, isolating you from family. Then come the accusations, the rage over imagined slights. By the time he hits you the first time, you're already too cut off from support to leave. Her description matched my previous life with Marcus exactly. One by one, I called the other women on the list. Each story was a variation on the same theme. Marcus, charming and attentive at first, gradually revealing his true nature through escalating control and violence. I knew what I had to do, but I also knew that leaving Marcus wouldn't be simple. In my previous life, my attempt to leave had triggered the murderous rage that ended my life. This time, I needed to be smarter, more strategic. First, I secured my financial independence, transferring my savings to a new account he couldn't access. Then, I quietly packed essentials and stored them with a trusted coworker. Finally, I documented everything: the controlling comments, the veiled threats, the increasingly frequent grabs of my arm that left finger-shaped bruises. All the while, I maintained the facade of a happy engagement. Just a few more weeks, I told myself each morning as I applied makeup to hide the shadows under my eyes. Just until everything is in place. What I hadn't planned for was Olivia's announcement. She and David were dating. The news reached me through our mother's excited phone call. "Isn't it wonderful?" she gushed. "After all that awkwardness, you and Olivia both found love. And now you can double date." The suggestion was so absurd I nearly laughed. Double date with the sister who had deliberately sabotaged my relationship with the man I truly loved, who was now apparently dating that very man. It seemed impossible that David, my David from both lifetimes, would actually choose Olivia. When I saw them together at our cousin's baby shower the following weekend, however, the reality was undeniable. They arrived holding hands, Olivia glowing with triumphant happiness, David more subdued but unmistakably attentive. They looked right together in a way that pierced me to my core. "Quite the unexpected pairing," Marcus murmured in my ear, his grip on my waist tightening painfully. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. Your sister always struck me as the type to want what isn't hers." The irony of this statement coming from Marcus, a man who in my previous life had pursued anything in a skirt while keeping me isolated at home, was almost too much to bear. But I smiled and nodded, playing the role of unconcerned fiancé, while cataloging the interaction for my growing documentation. That night, Marcus's mask slipped further. "You still have feelings for him," he accused as soon as we were alone. "I saw how you looked at them." "I was just surprised," I defended, maintaining distance between us. "It's an adjustment, seeing them together." "An adjustment," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Is that what you call it when you undress your ex with your eyes while standing next to your fiancé? Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for me?" The escalation was following the exact pattern Catherine had described, the exact pattern I remembered from before. Accusation, manipulation, making me doubt my own perceptions and intentions. I'd fallen into this trap once before, spent years believing I was the problem, that if only I could be better, do more, he wouldn't be angry. Not this time. I'm going to stay with my parents tonight, I said quietly, already moving toward the door where I deliberately left my overnight bag earlier. We both need some space to cool down. His reaction was explosive. You're not going anywhere, he shouted, grabbing my arm with bruising force. Not until we resolve this. I looked him directly in the eyes, summoning courage from the memory of where submission had led me before. Let go of me, Marcus. Now. Perhaps it was the steel in my voice, so different from the placating tone I usually adopted during his outbursts. Perhaps it was the fact that my parents were expecting me, that someone would come looking if I didn't arrive. Whatever the reason, he released my arm, though his eyes promised retribution later. This conversation isn't over, he warned as I walked out the door. No, I agreed. It isn't. That week became a careful dance of avoidance and preparation. I stayed with my parents under the pretense of helping my mother recover from minor surgery, using the time to finalize my escape plan. Marcus called constantly, alternating between apologies and thinly veiled threats. I responded with reassurances while secretly meeting with a lawyer to discuss protection orders based on my documentation. It was during this limbo period that David reached out unexpectedly. A simple text. Can we talk? Alone. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a public cafe near my office. He was waiting when I arrived, 2 coffees already on the table, prepared exactly how I liked. A detail that made my chest ache with the memory of happier times. Thank you for the information, I said without preamble, sliding into the seat across from him. You were right about Marcus. David's relief was palpable. Are you safe? Do you need help leaving him? The genuine concern in his voice made the next question even harder to ask. Why are you dating my sister? He flinched as if I'd struck him. It's complicated. Uncomplicate it for me, I insisted. After everything she did to come between us. After you told me nothing happened between you. Now you're together? Make it make sense, David. He stared into his coffee, shoulders slumped with what looked like genuine misery. Olivia came to me about 2 months ago, hysterical. She confessed everything. How she'd deliberately tried to seduce me. How she'd lied to you about what happened. She said watching you with Marcus was killing her. That she couldn't bear to see you make such a terrible mistake. So what? Dating her was your solution. To punish me for not believing you. The hurt in my voice was unmistakable. No, he exclaimed, then lowered his voice when nearby patrons glanced our way. No. It's not what you think. Olivia and I aren't really dating. We're pretending to keep tabs on you and Marcus. She was convinced he would hurt you, and based on what I discovered, she was right. The revelation stunned me into silence. All this time, I'd believed my sister had betrayed me twice over. First by trying to steal David, then by actually succeeding after I was engaged to Marcus. But according to David, it had been an act, a protective ruse. Why didn't you just tell me what you found out about Marcus? I finally asked. David's expression turned grim. We tried. Olivia called you repeatedly after she learned about his history with Catherine and the others. You wouldn't take her calls. I sent emails you never answered. We even went to your apartment, but Marcus always intercepted us. It was true. In the early days of my engagement, Marcus had appointed himself gatekeeper of my communications, offering to spare me unnecessary stress by screening calls and managing my social calendar. I'd allowed it, believing it was temporary, unaware that I was already falling into the isolation pattern that had defined my previous marriage to him. So you and Olivia, I began, still struggling to process this new information. Are friends, nothing more, David confirmed. Though she's been a good ally in figuring out how to help you. She loves you, Eleanor. Despite the terrible mistake she made in trying to come between us, she loves you and is desperate to make amends. Tears stung my eyes as conflicting emotions warred within me. Relief that David hadn't betrayed me. Anger at having been deceived again even if with good intentions. Shame that I'd fallen into Marcus's trap despite knowing exactly who he was. I'm leaving him, I said finally. I've been making preparations. By next week, I'll be gone. David reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching mine. Let us help you. Please. You don't have to do this alone. The sincerity in his eyes was my undoing. After weeks of navigating Marcus's unpredictable moods alone, the prospect of support, real support, from people who genuinely cared about my well-being, broke something open inside me. Okay, I whispered. But we do this my way. I won't risk anyone else getting hurt because of my mistakes. We devised a plan, the three of us, David, Olivia, and me, meeting secretly while Marcus was on a business trip. Olivia wept as she apologized for her earlier deception, for the jealousy that had driven her to try to steal David. I've always felt like the lesser sister, she confessed. Less talented, less beautiful, less worthy of love. When I saw you with David, so perfectly happy, something dark took over. I wanted to prove I could take even that from you. It was sick and I'm so sorry. Her remorse seemed genuine, and in that moment, I chose to believe her. What purpose would further deception serve now? The plan was simple but effective. I would tell Marcus I wanted to celebrate our engagement with a small dinner at my apartment. Olivia and David would be present as witnesses, along with two of David's cousins who worked in law enforcement. I would calmly explain that the engagement was over, return his ring, and request that he leave. If he became violent or threatening, there would be multiple witnesses, including officers who could intervene. What we didn't account for was Marcus's sixth sense for manipulation. The same instinct that had made him such an effective abuser in my previous life. He arrived at my apartment early, catching me alone before the others were due to arrive. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he handed me a bouquet of lilies, my favorite in this life, though I'd never told him that. Another red flag I'd ignored. We need to talk, he said, closing the door behind him with deliberate slowness. I know you've been avoiding me. I know you've been meeting with David and your sister. Did you think I wouldn't find out? My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to remain calm. The others will be here soon, I said, moving toward the kitchen where my phone lay on the counter. Let's just enjoy dinner and we can talk later. Marcus was faster, intercepting me before I could reach my phone. There's not going to be a dinner, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. You're going to call them and cancel. Then you and I are going to leave town for a while, somewhere we can reconnect without all these distractions. It was happening again, just as it had in my previous life. The isolation, the control, the implicit threat. But this time, I wasn't the same vulnerable woman who had once believed she deserved such treatment. No, Marcus, I said firmly. I'm not going anywhere with you. In fact, I want you to leave. The engagement is over. His laugh was cold, devoid of any genuine amusement. That's not how this works, Eleanor. You don't get to make those decisions. Actually, she does, came David's voice from the doorway. He stood there with Olivia and his cousins, the door I thought Marcus had closed apparently still ajar. And she's not alone. The rage that transformed Marcus's face in that moment was chillingly familiar. The same expression he'd worn in the last moments of my previous life as he watched me fall down the stairs. But this time, I was surrounded by protectors. This time his rage was impotent. Marcus was escorted from the building, spewing threats and accusations. The protection order was filed that same day, using the extensive documentation I'd gathered. In the weeks that followed, 3 more women came forward with similar experiences, strengthening the case against him. If this story of second chances and hidden truths has captured your attention, please subscribe now to make sure you don't miss what happens next. And if you're enjoying this journey, your comments mean the world to me. As for David, Olivia, and me, the road to healing was neither straight nor simple. Trust, once broken, requires time and consistent effort to rebuild. The 3 of us attended counseling, together and separately, untangling the web of hurt, miscommunication, and insecurity that had led us to this point. Olivia moved to Seattle 6 months later, accepting a job opportunity that she'd previously turned down to stay close to home. I need to build my own life, she told me before leaving. Find out who I am outside of being your sister. I think that's the only way I'll ever truly overcome this jealousy that's poisoned me for so long. Her honesty was both painful and healing. We promised to visit regularly, to maintain our relationship without the competitive undercurrent that had defined it for too long. David and I began again slowly. Coffee dates, long walks, careful conversations about expectations, fears, and hopes. The weight of 2 lifetimes of memories, one only I carried, sometimes made me feel ancient in comparison to his singular experience. But there was also something profoundly beautiful about the second chance we'd been given, about the opportunity to build something even stronger from the wreckage of what had been broken. I never stopped loving you, he confessed one evening as we sat by the river that ran through our town. Even when I thought you'd chosen him over me, even when I was pretending to date your sister to try to protect you, I never stopped. I know, I replied softly. In this life and the one before, you've always been constant. I was the one who lost faith. He looked puzzled, as he often did when I made reference to my previous life. A concept I'd never fully explained to him, knowing how implausible it would sound. He assumed it was a metaphorical reference to the person I'd been before, not understanding that I quite literally carried the memories of a different timeline. Well, he said, taking my hand in his, whatever came before, whatever mistakes we've made, I'm grateful for now, for this second chance. I leaned into his solid warmth, savoring the safety I felt in his presence. Me too, I whispered. More than you could possibly know. 2 years have passed since that terrible night with Marcus. He eventually pled guilty to multiple charges of assault and battery from previous relationships, avoiding the more serious charges but still receiving a substantial sentence. I testified at his sentencing hearing, looking him directly in the eyes as I described the fear and isolation I'd experienced during our brief engagement. You will not define my story, I told him, and by extension the court. Not in this life. He stared back with hollow hatred, but I felt nothing but pity for him. The power he once held over me, in this life and the one before, had evaporated completely. David proposed on an ordinary Tuesday evening, as we cooked dinner together in the small house we'd purchased 6 months earlier. No grand gesture, no audience, just the two of us, flour on our cheeks from the homemade pasta we were attempting, laughter in the air. Marry me, he said simply, reaching into the drawer beside him and pulling out a small velvet box, the same box I'd returned to him years before. Inside was his grandmother's emerald ring, exactly as I remembered it from both my current life and the glimpses of what might have been in my previous one. Yes, I answered without hesitation. In this life and any other. Olivia was my maid of honor at our wedding, standing beside me with genuine joy that held no trace of her former resentment. She'd found her own path in Seattle, building a career she loved and a relationship with a kind woman who clearly adored her. I'm so happy for you, she told me as we shared a quiet moment before the ceremony. And I'm so sorry for almost ruining this. You and David, you're meant to be together. I see that now. Everything happens for a reason, I said, thinking of the bizarre, inexplicable second chance I'd been given. Sometimes the path to where we're meant to be isn't straight. She laughed, adjusting my veil with sisterly tenderness. That's one way of putting it. But we got here in the end, didn't we? As I walked down the aisle toward David, his face alight with love and promise, I felt the weight of my previous life finally lift completely. Whatever cosmic force had given me this second chance, this opportunity to rewrite my tragic ending into something beautiful, I was profoundly grateful. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still wonder about the mechanics of my rebirth. Was it merely a vivid hallucination in my dying moments? A parallel universe? A genuine reincarnation with my memories intact? I'll never know for certain. But what I do know is this. In this life I recognized the warning signs. In this life, I found the courage to walk away from danger. In this life, I reclaimed my power from those who sought to diminish me, whether through malice like Marcus or misguided jealousy like Olivia. And most importantly, in this life, I found my way back to David, the love I was always meant to have. 3 months ago, we discovered I was pregnant, something that never happened in my previous life with Marcus. As David and I prepare for this new chapter, creating a nursery in the spare bedroom of our cozy home, I often find myself overwhelmed with gratitude for this second chance that has become so much more than just avoiding my previous fate. Olivia flies in regularly to help with preparations, Her excitement about becoming an aunt healing the last lingering wounds between us. She's brought her partner on recent visits, the four of us forming a tight-knit family unit that supports rather than undermines. Do you ever think about how differently things could have turned out? Olivia asked me recently as we sorted through tiny clothes for the baby. If I hadn't confessed to David, if you had stayed with Marcus. The question sent a chill through me. Memories of my previous life's violent end flashing unbidden. Sometimes, I admitted. But I try not to dwell on might-have-beens. We're here now, and that's what matters. She nodded, folding a minuscule sweater with unusual care. I still can't believe I almost ruined everything because of petty jealousy. When I think about what could have happened to you with Marcus. But it didn't, I interrupted gently. Because despite everything, when it really mattered, you chose to be my sister rather than my rival. You chose to help me rather than hurt me. Tears welled in her eyes. I'll always choose that now. Always. As we embrace this new chapter, David and I as parents, Olivia as the devoted aunt, our family expanding with this new life, I sometimes wonder if my unborn child will have any cosmic connection to my previous existence. Will they somehow carry the wisdom I gained through living twice? Will they inherently recognize the difference between love and control, between healthy attachment and dangerous obsession? I can't know, of course. But I can ensure they grow up in a home filled with genuine love and respect. I can teach them to recognize their own worth, to never accept treatment that diminishes them. I can show them, through example, that second chances aren't just about avoiding past mistakes. They're opportunities to create something even better than what was lost. Sometimes, late at night with David sleeping beside me, I place my hands on my growing belly and make silent promises to our child. I can ensure they grow up in a home filled with genuine love and respect. I can teach them to recognize their own worth, to never accept treatment that diminishes them. I can show them, through example, that second chances aren't just about avoiding past mistakes. They're opportunities to create something even better than what was lost. Sometimes, late at night with David sleeping beside me, I place my hands on my growing belly and make silent promises to our child. I promise to protect them from the darkness I've known. I promise to nurture their confidence and independence. I promise to love them unconditionally while teaching them that love should never require surrender of self. And sometimes, in these quiet moments, I find myself whispering the story of my two lives, the one that ended in tragedy and the one that blossomed into joy. Not because I expect my unborn child to understand, but because telling this story reminds me of how precious this second chance truly is. Last week, we learned we're having a daughter. David was ecstatic, already making plans for father-daughter camping trips and science experiments. I felt a different kind of joy, fierce and protective. My daughter would grow up knowing her value. She would never doubt her worth or believe she deserved mistreatment. She would never feel compelled to compete with another woman for validation, as Olivia had with me. What should we name her? David asked as we lay in bed that night, his hand gentle on my stomach. I had been considering this question since we first learned I was pregnant, weighing the significance of various family names against my desire for my daughter to forge her own path. Hope, I said finally. Let's call her Hope. David smiled, understanding without explanation. Hope, he repeated. Perfect. Hope for the future. Hope for healing. Hope for the kind of love that builds rather than destroys. As my due date approaches, I find myself reflecting more deeply on the bizarre miracle of my second chance. Was I the only one granted this opportunity to rewrite my fate? Are there others walking among us who carry the memories of previous lives, making different choices, avoiding tragedies only they know were coming? I'll never have answers to these questions. But I've made peace with the mystery. Whatever cosmic force or random chance gave me this opportunity, I've honored it by creating a life worth living, not just avoiding death, but embracing true happiness. Marcus remains in prison, his appeals unsuccessful. I no longer fear running into him, no longer flinch at the sound of footsteps behind me. The nightmares that plagued me in the early days after leaving him, memories from both lives blending into terrifying dreamscapes of pursuit and violence, have faded to rare occurrences. David doesn't know the full truth of my rebirth, though I've shared enough of my intuitions about Marcus that he accepts my seemingly inexplicable knowledge without question. "You've always been perceptive," he says when I explain how I knew exactly what Marcus would do or say in certain situations. It's easier than trying to explain that I lived a whole life with this man before, that I died at his hands in another timeline. Some truths are too strange to share, even with those we love most completely. Olivia visited last weekend, bringing a handmade quilt for the baby and news of her own engagement. As we celebrated with sparkling cider, in solidarity with my pregnant state, I watched her face, animated, confident, genuinely happy, and marveled at the transformation. The sister who had once been consumed with jealousy and competition had found her own path to fulfillment, separate from and no longer in shadow of mine. "I've been thinking," she said as we washed dishes after dinner. David having stepped out to walk her fiancée Madeline to the store for forgotten ice cream. "All those years I spent resenting you, wanting what you had. I was looking in the wrong direction. I was so fixated on being like you that I never explored who I actually was." I handed her a plate to dry. Our domestic synchronicity, a far cry from the tension that once defined our relationship. "And who are you, Liv? Now that you know?" Her smile was radiant with self-knowledge. "I'm someone who builds things rather than taking them apart. Someone who loves deeply but no longer needs external validation to feel worthy of love in return. Someone who's learned that genuine happiness comes from connection, not competition." She paused, her expression turning serious. "And I'm your sister. Always. No matter what." The simplicity of her declaration brought tears to my eyes. In my previous life, our relationship had withered under the strain of my marriage to Marcus, his isolation tactics driving a wedge between us that never fully healed. In this life, despite the painful detour of her betrayal and my engagement to Marcus, we had found our way back to each other. Stronger, wiser, more compassionate toward each other's flaws and struggles. "Always," I agreed, resting my head briefly on her shoulder. When Hope was born on a snow-covered January morning, the delivery room filled with a fierce, primal joy I had never experienced in either of my lives. David wept as he held our daughter for the first time, his face transformed by wonder and love. Olivia and Madeline arrived hours later with balloons and tiny, impractical shoes, their excitement palpable as they took turns holding the newest member of our family. Looking at the circle of love surrounding my daughter, her father's steadfast devotion, her aunt's protective affection, the extended family of friends who had supported us through every step of this journey, I felt a profound sense of completion. This was what I had been given a second chance for, not just to avoid death at Marcus's hands, but to create this moment, this family, this love. As Hope grew from a newborn into an alert, curious infant, I watched for signs that she might somehow carry awareness from beyond this life. Would she have unusual perceptions? Inexplicable knowledge? Some cosmic connection to my previous existence? But she was simply a child, perfectly ordinary in her development, miraculous in the way all children are to their parents. And I was grateful for her beautiful ordinariness. My daughter would not carry the burden of memories from a life not lived. She would not navigate relationships with the ghost of tragedy hanging over her. She would simply grow, learn, love, and be loved, the natural progression of a life untainted by foreknowledge or fear. On Hope's first birthday, we hosted a small celebration in our backyard. David had built a swing set that she was still too small to use independently, but delighted in being placed upon. Olivia and Madeline, now married, brought an elaborate cake shaped like Hope's favorite stuffed elephant. Our home filled with laughter, the simple joy of celebrating this milestone surrounded by those who had walked the complex path that led to this moment. Later, after the guests had gone and Hope was asleep in her crib, David found me sitting on the back porch, gazing at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside me with 2 glasses of wine. I accepted one gratefully, leaning into his familiar warmth. "Just thinking about journeys. About how rarely they follow the path we expect." He nodded, understanding in his own way. If someone had told me 3 years ago that we'd be here, married, with a daughter, after everything we went through, I'm not sure I would have believed them. "And yet here we are," I murmured, thinking of the even longer, stranger journey only I knew about. From death at Marcus's hands to rebirth a decade earlier. From repeated mistakes to finally finding the right path. From tragedy to this moment of perfect contentment. David's arm tightened around me. I wouldn't change a thing, you know. Even the painful parts. They led us here. I considered this, weighing the suffering of my previous life against the joy of my current one. Would I erase that first existence if I could? The years of abuse with Marcus, the isolation, the fear, the violent end? Or did that experience, terrible as it was, serve a purpose in shaping who I had become in this second chance? Neither would I said finally, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Without the wisdom gained through suffering, I might have made the same mistakes again. I might have missed the warning signs with Marcus in this life too. Might have lost David permanently through pride or misunderstanding. Might never have reached this place of profound happiness and peace. Two lives, woven together into one consciousness. One ending in tragedy, one blossoming into joy. Both necessary parts of my journey. As Hope's second birthday approached, we received unexpected news. Marcus was being released on parole, having served the minimum of his sentence with good behavior. The notification came in a formal letter from the Victim Services Office, clinical in its wording but devastating in its implications. He would be required to stay away from me due to the permanent restraining order, but he would be free, in the same city, breathing the same air, potentially crossing paths with me or my family. The fear I thought I had conquered came rushing back, memories from both lives colliding in a tornado of anxiety. What if he sought revenge? What if he hurt David or, God forbid, Hope? What if this second chance at life ended just as violently as my first? David found me shaking on the kitchen floor, the letter crumpled in my fist. He's getting out. I managed between ragged breaths. He's getting out and he'll come for us. He'll hurt us. He always said no one leaves him, no one rejects him without consequences. The panic attack was the first I'd had since Hope's birth, my body remembering trauma my mind had worked hard to process. David sat with me, patient and steady, until the shaking subsided, until I could breathe normally again. We'll increase security, he said practically once I was calmer. New locks, a camera system. I'll speak with my cousins about additional protective measures. And if necessary, we can move, another town, another state. Whatever it takes to keep our family safe. His calm practicality anchored me, reminded me that I wasn't alone this time. Unlike in my previous life, when Marcus had systematically isolated me from everyone who might have helped, I now had a network of support. People who believed me, who understood the threat, who would stand beside me against danger. We took precautions. The new security system was installed. I varied my routes to and from work, never taking Hope to the same park twice in 1 week. David and I created emergency protocols, code words, contingency plans. We lived, but with a layer of vigilance that cast a shadow over our otherwise happy life. 3 weeks after Marcus's release, Olivia called with disturbing news. He came to my gallery opening last night, she said, her voice tight with controlled fear. Just stood there, looking at my paintings, sipping champagne like any other patron. When I noticed him, he smiled, this cold, calculated smile, and raised his glass to me before leaving. The violation was clear. While he couldn't legally approach me, there was nothing preventing him from intimidating those close to me. The message was equally clear. I see you. I can reach you through those you love. We reported the incident, but there was little the authorities could do. He hadn't approached Olivia directly, hadn't made explicit threats. He had simply been present, a silent reminder of his existence and his potential for harm. The anxiety that had begun to recede returned with crushing force. I found myself checking locks repeatedly, startling at unexpected noises, reluctant to let Hope out of my sight even for a moment. David suggested therapy, and I agreed, recognizing the signs of post-traumatic stress from my previous life. Dr. Winters, a specialist in trauma and abuse recovery, became my lifeline. In her quiet office, I shared as much as I could about my fears, omitting the impossible truth of my rebirth, but conveying the very real terror of knowing what Marcus was capable of. You're experiencing a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, she assured me during one session. The human brain is designed to remember threats for survival. Your body remembers the danger this man represents, even if he hasn't physically harmed you in this relationship. If only she knew the full truth, that my body remembered not just the threat but the actuality of violence, the sensation of falling downstairs with the knowledge that the man I had married had pushed me, the fading consciousness as life slipped away. But I kept these memories to myself, focusing instead on developing coping strategies for my present reality. You have choices now that you didn't have before, Dr. Winters reminded me. You have support, resources, awareness. You are not powerless. She was right. Whatever Marcus's intentions, I was no longer the isolated, gaslight woman I had been in either iteration of our relationship. I had David, Olivia, friends, colleagues, people who knew the truth and would stand with me against any threat. Gradually, with therapy and the passage of time without further incidents, the acute fear began to subside. We maintained our precautions, but stopped allowing them to dominate our daily lives. Hope's second birthday came and went, a joyous celebration untainted by fear. Then on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon I saw him. I was leaving a client meeting downtown, walking back to my car parked 2 blocks away. The sidewalk was crowded with the usual mix of business people, shoppers, and tourists. And there, sitting at an outdoor cafe across the street, was Marcus. He wasn't looking in my direction, seemed completely absorbed in his newspaper and coffee. But the sight of him, older, thinner than I remembered, but unmistakably the man who had ended my previous life and threatened my current one, stopped me cold. Fight or flight instinct kicked in, my heart racing, palms instantly damp. My first impulse was to turn and run in the opposite direction. But something, perhaps the therapy, perhaps the hard-won wisdom of 2 lifetimes, kept me rooted in place, observing. He hadn't seen me. There was no stalking behavior, no deliberate intimidation. He was simply having coffee in a public place, as was his right despite our history. The realization was oddly deflating. In my fears, he had grown into a monster with supernatural abilities to track and torment me. The reality, a middle-aged man alone with his coffee, seemed almost anticlimactic. I continued to my car, shaken but also strangely calm. When I told David about the sighting that evening, his immediate response was concern. Do you think it was coincidence, or was he watching for you? Honestly, I think it was coincidence, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. He didn't see me, didn't react, just seemed to be going about his day. Still, we should be careful, David cautioned. Maybe change up your client meeting locations for a while, just to be safe. I agreed, but the encounter had shifted something in my perception. Marcus still posed a potential threat, still warranted caution. But he no longer held the power of a mythic villain in my mind. He was just a man, a dangerous man with a history of violence. Yes, but a man nonetheless. Not omnipotent. Not omnipresent. Not in control of my life or my happiness. That night, as I watched Hope sleeping peacefully in her crib, her small chest rising and falling with each breath, I made a decision. I would not allow fear of Marcus to dictate our lives. We would maintain reasonable precautions, but we would not live in his shadow. We would not grant him that power. The next morning, I called Dr. Winters and scheduled an extra session. I want to work on reclaiming my sense of security, I told her. I'm tired of letting fear control me. Over the following months, I did exactly that. With therapeutic support, I developed stronger coping mechanisms for anxiety. I took a self-defense class, not because I expected to physically confront Marcus, but because the training helped me feel less vulnerable. David and I bought a house in a new neighborhood, not fleeing in fear, but making a planned move to accommodate our growing family. As we learned I was pregnant again, life continued its forward momentum. Hope started preschool, forming friendships and developing her own distinct personality. Stubborn like her father, observant like me, Olivia and Madeline announced they were adopting, expanding our family circle further. David's novel was finally picked up by a publisher, fulfilling a dream he'd held since before I knew him in either life. And somewhere in the background of all this joy and growth, Marcus existed. A diminishing shadow that occasionally crossed my awareness through mutual acquaintances or glimpses across crowded rooms, but no longer the central thread around which my existence revolved. 3 years passed without direct incident. Our second child, a son named Ethan, was born healthy and strong. Hope became a protective big sister, serious about her new responsibilities. Our home filled with the beautiful chaos of family life, toys underfoot, children's artwork on the refrigerator, the constant cycle of meals and baths and bedtime stories. Then came the news that rewrote the ending once more. Marcus had died of a sudden heart attack at 42. The information reached me through a former colleague who had known us both, her text message matter of fact. Thought you should know. Marcus Reed died yesterday. Heart failure. I sat with this information for a long time, unsure how to process it. There was no satisfaction in his death, no vindictive joy. But there was relief, profound, bone-deep relief that the specter of potential harm had been permanently lifted from my family. That evening, after the children were asleep, I told David. His reaction mirrored my own. Not celebration, but a quiet acknowledgement that a source of tension had been removed from our lives. "How are you feeling?" he asked, watching me carefully for signs of distress. I considered the question honestly. "Peaceful," I said finally. "Like a chapter has closed completely. Like we can fully move forward now." He nodded, understanding. "No more looking over our shoulders." "No more," I agreed. That night, I dreamt of my previous life for the first time in years. Not the violent end, but earlier moments. Ordinary days when I had still believed in the possibility of happiness with Marcus, before the abuse escalated beyond my ability to rationalize or deny. In the dream, I was both participant and observer, watching my younger self make excuses for behaviors that should have been unforgivable, seeing the gradual erosion of my boundaries and self-worth with the clarity of hindsight. I woke feeling strangely grateful, not for the suffering I had endured, but for the wisdom it had granted me. In this second life, I had recognized the warning signs. I had valued myself enough to walk away. I had built a life of genuine love and partnership rather than control and fear. Marcus was gone, in this life as in my previous one. But this time, I remained, not just surviving but thriving, surrounded by the family I had created, the love I had chosen, the life I had built deliberately and joyfully. As I lay in the darkness beside David's sleeping form, listening to the distant sounds of our children breathing in their rooms down the hall, I realized that my rebirth had served its purpose. I had been given a second chance not just to avoid death at Marcus's hands, but to truly live, to experience the fullness of love and family that had been denied me before. The how and why of my rebirth remained a mystery. Perhaps it was simply a hallucination in my dying moments, my brain creating an elaborate fantasy of what could have been. Perhaps it was something more, a genuine cosmic intervention, a tear in the fabric of time and space, a miracle-defying scientific explanation. The explanation didn't matter. What mattered was that I had used this second chance well. I had learned from my mistakes rather than repeating them. I had chosen courage over fear, authenticity over accommodation, healthy love over destructive obsession. And now, with Marcus's death, the circle was complete. The threat that had ended my previous life was permanently removed from my current one. My children would grow up without his shadow looming over them. David and I would continue building our life together without the underlying tension of potential danger. The next morning, I woke before the rest of the family, slipping quietly from bed to watch the sunrise from our back porch. As golden light spilled over the horizon, illuminating the swing set where Hope played and the garden Ethan toddled through, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. In my first life, I had died without experiencing this simple, extraordinary joy of a life well lived, of love freely given and received, of family created through choice rather than obligation. In this second life, I had been granted the gift of knowing what truly mattered, of recognizing genuine love when it was offered, of building connections based on respect rather than fear or control. I heard movement behind me and turned to see David, sleep-rumpled and smiling, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You're up early," he said, handing me one. "Just enjoying the quiet," I replied, leaning into him as he joined me on the porch step. "Thinking about how lucky we are." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "We made our own luck, I think. By choosing each other. By working through the hard parts. By not giving up when it would have been easier to walk away." I smiled at his perspective. So true, and yet missing the even deeper truth of just how far I had traveled to reach this moment. From death to rebirth. From tragedy to joy. From a life cut short by violence to one overflowing with love and possibility. I love you, I said simply. In this life and beyond. And I love you, he answered, his arm warm around my shoulders as we watched the day begin. Always. Inside our home. The children would soon wake, filling the morning with their energy and demands, their laughter and occasional tears. The day would unfold with its mixture of mundane tasks and small wonders. Life, ordinary, precious life, would continue its forward movement. And I would be here for all of it, fully present, deeply grateful for this second chance that had become so much more than simply avoiding death. It had become about truly living, consciously, joyfully, authentically. My sister had once pushed me toward an abusive man out of jealousy and insecurity. My own fears and misplaced trust had nearly led me down the same tragic path as in my previous life. But in the end, love and truth had prevailed. The dark forces that sought to define my story, Marcus's violence, Olivia's jealousy, my own tendency toward self-sacrifice, had been transformed into something brighter. If you've found meaning in this journey of rebirth and redemption, please subscribe to hear more stories of transformation. And I'd love to read your comments about times when seeming misfortune ultimately led you to your true path. As I sip my coffee beside the man I was always meant to love, watching the sun rise on another day of the life I was given a second chance to live, I know with absolute certainty. This is what I was reborn for. Not just to escape death, but to embrace life in all its complex, beautiful fullness. Not just to avoid past mistakes, but to create a future worthy of the miraculous opportunity I'd been granted. And whatever comes next, whatever joy or challenge awaits us on the horizon, I will face it with the wisdom of 2 lifetimes, the strength forged through overcoming trauma, and the profound knowledge that every moment of this second chance is a gift beyond measure.